Hi, my name's Michelle, and in this video I've got 5 MCM furniture makeovers for you, 4 dresses and 1 set of nightstands. So grab yourself a cuppa and enjoy these 5 inspiring MCM furniture makeovers. The first thing I did was take off all of the hardware because I knew I would be reusing that. And then I went in and gave it a really good clean, first with some hot soapy water with some Dawn dish soap in it. Dawn dish soap is great because it's a degreaser, which means that it helps get off any inbuilt grime or dirt that's kicked up over the years. After I went in with the Dawn dish soap, I went back over with some clean hot water just to get any residue off. Once the dresser was clean, I went in with some Elmer's wood fillet just to fill in a couple of gouges on the dresser base and 1 or 2 on the dresser drawers. Once that was dry, I gave everything a good scuff sand. So what that means is I went in with a pretty high grit sandpaper, 220 grit, and basically the higher the grit, the finer the sandpaper is, so the less rough it is, I guess. And scuff sand is just a really good way to very slightly rough up the surface so your paint can adhere to it very well. Sometimes if a surface is too shiny, paint has a bit of trouble adhering to it. Once everything had been scuff sanded, I wiped it all down just to make sure I got off any fine dust that might have come from the sanding process. I put tape around the edge of all of my drawers. I was going to be spray painting these drawers, and this allowed me to make sure I'd get no overspray on the sides. I had a drawer where the sides were coming apart a little bit, so I got my wood glue and put glue within the join, and then I clamped the drawers to ensure that it had time to dry together. And I also used my wooden mallet to just hammer everything correctly into place so it was sitting beautifully for it to dry. To give a bit of contrast to this dresser, I really wanted to do the top 2 drawers in a wood tone. And so I had a bit of a look at this white manufactured finish that was on the dresser to begin with, because I was pretty sure that there was wood underneath that. So I got out my orbital sander and my sandpaper, and I actually just sanded the finish off, which ended up working pretty well, and there was some really nice wood underneath that. I decided to stain the wood with Minwax's gel stain in walnut. So I coated that on nice and thick. I left it for 3 minutes, which is what I believe it says to leave it for on the back of the can. And then I came back in and wiped off any excess. I don't have footage of this, but I did go back in and give them a top coat as well in the same Minwax polyacrylic in the satin finish to match the rest of the dresser. I also used my Wagner 3000 sprayer. first I lined the paint pot with a disposable liner, and this just saves time on cleanup later. And then I used a strainer to pour my paint into the paint pot, and this just means that you get really smooth paint. There's no little bits of debris or paint that's dried up in there. This is a really important part of it because if you have little bits like that in your pot, it can actually clog up your spray gun. To paint this dresser, I used Fusion Mineral Paint in Coal Black, and I love working with the Fusion Mineral Paint because it doesn't require a primer. It's got really good adhesion and coverage. So unfortunately, I don't have any footage of me doing my first coat of paint on the dresser base and drawers. So you'll see me here, I've already done the first coat of paint and I'm ready to go in for the second coat. And I actually sanded in between coats with a very fine grit sandpaper, 220. And when I do this sand, I'm not trying to sand any of the paint off. I'm just very lightly going over to rub down any little bits of dust or things that I might have got in the coat so that I can get a really smooth finish afterwards. After I had sanded it down, I went in and wiped all that sanding dust off and went in with my second coat of paint. I'd taken off the handles from this dresser because I knew I was going to reuse them, but they just needed a little bit of love. So first I gave them a really good wash in some soapy water, and then I rinsed them all off in some clean water because I knew I wanted to spray paint these all in a gold colour and I wanted to make sure they were nice and clean to start with. First I went in with some primer, and I started priming with this primer and then my spray can stopped working. So I had to do take 2 and come in with a different primer afterwards that I had, and it ended up working fine. Once the primer was dry, I came in with my Rust-Oleum Gold spray paint and I coated all of the handles with very light coats of the spray paint. You don't want to do heavy coats because then sometimes the paint can run and drip. So you want just lots of light coats. After the second coat of paint had dried, I sanded again with the 220 grit sandpaper, wiped it down, and it was time to go in with my top coat. I used Minwax's Polycrylic in a satin finish, and I just tinted it very slightly with a little bit of the leftover Fusion Mineral Paint. And what this does, it just helps prevent any cloudiness. Sometimes when you put a clear top coat over a darker colour, you can get a little bit of cloudiness in the finish, and tinting it with a little bit of the darker paint just helps prevent this. And I practiced on a piece of cardboard first with my spray gun just to make sure I was getting the right flow coming out that I was happy with. And then I went in and did my top coat. So I found these nightstands at one of our local thrift stores and they were $15 each. And what drew me to them were those gorgeous little brass feet they had at the front and the brass looking handles as well. And I thought that these cute nightstands would look amazing with a black base and a wood fronted drawer. First thing I'm going to do is take these handles off, and then I'm going to give them both a really good clean with some Dawn dish soap in some hot water. And I'm using Dawn because it's a degreaser, and what that does, it'll help get off any grime that's accumulated on these over the years. The bases of these nightstands needed a little bit of love before they were ready to paint. They had some chipped veneer and places that I needed to fill in. So I used my Elmer's wood filler, and I like this one because it changes color as it dries. So it goes from pink to a light tan, and that lets me know it's ready to be sanded down. So I've got some painter's tape, and I am going to cover up these beautiful little brass toots we've got going on. Alright, so this guy had a bunch of areas that just needed to be glued down. The veneer had started to come off, so we've got quite a few sections here that are being glued down. So I'll leave these clamped overnight and it should be all good in the morning to keep working on it. So wood filler has dried, and now I'm going to sand it down, but also give these nightstands a scuff sand. And that's just a really light sand to scuff up the surface a little bit so that our paint will stick to it. Set up and ready to do my first coat of paint, and I've got my Wagner 3000 spray gun. I've also got face mask, always important, and this is what I'm going to do my practice sprays on. You always want to do some practice sprays until you get your flow right. Now this coat will be a very thin coat to start with, and we'll just gradually build the coats up. Alright, let's do this. I used Fusion's mineral paint in coal black for these nightstands, and I love Fusion mineral paint because it sprays on nice and easily with my Wagner 3000 spray gun. And with Fusion mineral paint you don't need a primer, which I really like. It just takes one extra step out. So I ended up doing 2 coats of the Fusion mineral paint, and then I went in with a top coat, and I used Minwax's polycrylic in the satin finish, and I just tinted it ever so slightly with a little bit of my leftover Fusion mineral paint in the black. And what that does, it just helps prevent any cloudiness with the clear top coat over the darker colours. Alright, so I've cleaned this drawer front, and instead of trying to sand it down, it's got a thin layer of veneer. I was able to tell from the bottom of the drawer. It's probably a little bit hard to see on camera, but I can tell that there's a thin layer of veneer before we get to the pressed board. So I will be able to take this finish off and stain the veneer. But instead of sanding it off, I'm going to try a new product that I haven't used before called QCS, Quick Clean Safe. And it's a product that strips finishes off. It is meant for more for old and antique furniture, so we'll see how well it works on these. I imagine these would probably have been made in the 1950s. So basically the idea is that I spray all across the front of this drawer and I have to leave it for 15 minutes. So we're going to spray the front of this really well. Alright, so it's been 15 minutes. Let's see how this is going. Ooh, some bits are coming off, but I think this would need a lot more time, especially in the middle here. And it might just be like it won't work on this particular finish. Okay, so I started using some steel wool on it, and it seems to be making a big difference in terms of my ability to get stuff off. It's still not amazing on this, I find. You can definitely see it starting to come off, which is super cool. Alright, it's getting a bit dark outside, but I wanted to give this one more go for the night before I packed it in. I got a little bit coarser, kind of steel wool, copper, not quite sure. Found it under the sink. I'm gonna give it a go and see if, ooh, that's what I like. Alright, this seems to be coming off way more now. Maybe I just needed to like scuff it up a bit and then leave it for a lot longer. I left it quite a chunk longer this last time. Not a huge chunk, like maybe 25 minutes instead of the 15. We'll see how much we can get off. Okay, so now I believe I'm just meant to wipe it down with a damp cloth to get any of the remaining residue off, and we'll see how it's looking. So I'm ready to stain the drawers. I got most of it off with the stain remover, the old finish, and then I went over them with a light sand. And today I'm going to use Minwax's gel stain in walnut, and I'm just going to wipe it on with a bit of lint-free towel and leave it on for 3 minutes, and then you come back and wipe it off. Sometimes I find like a kind of like a seal forms around the top, like it goes hard on the top of your hand. That's okay, just take it off. See, so we put some of this on. We can use the wet straw. Always wear gloves when you do this because it's a bit gloopy, a bit like pudding. You don't want to get it on your hands. That'll stain them for a while. Oops, I got some on the driveway. They're both done. I'm not sure if you can see on camera, but this one has taken the stain much better than this one. This one's a bit more speckled. I think that's because I didn't get all of the finish off, so it's not soaking in. We've got a bit of sunlight, so don't worry about this patch. That's just the sun. But over here, there's bits where it hasn't taken as well. I think that's because I didn't get all of the old finish off potentially. So learn from my mistakes. Get all your old finish off. But overall, not too bad. I think with the top coat, they'll look good. Alright, time to top coat the drawers. We're going to use some polyurethane, fast drying from Minwax. It's a clear coat and it's got a gloss finish. Just a brush that I have from the the dollar store. And let's do it. So try to make sure you do thin coats. So I ended up doing, it was either 2 or 3 coats of the polyurethane just to give it a nice finish. After giving the handles a really good clean, I discovered that the finish and the color on the handles wasn't really there anymore. So I decided to give it a little bit of a refresh, and for this I used some metallic wax. And I mixed 2 colors. I mixed a bronze and a gold together, and I painted that onto the handles. It goes on as a wax and then you let it set for 24 hours and then it's basically nice and hard. So I reassembled the nightstands, reattached the handles to the drawer fronts and put them together. I'm just putting some feed and wax on the wooden drawer slides. So I'm doing underneath the drawers and also the wooden slide on the dresser. And basically this just makes sure the drawers will slide in and out really smoothly. And I just wanted to give you a reminder of this is what the nightstands looked like when I first got them. Now I just wanted to say, if you enjoy these kind of projects, furniture flips, making over rooms, DIY projects around the house, please consider subscribing down below to my channel. And if you're enjoying this video, just give it a like as well. And this is how they look now. I'm going to show you how I took this beat up old dresser and turned it into a beautiful modern piece. Now the front of these drawer fronts had a lot of scratches and I knew I'd have to fix that, and there was also some sticky residue left on the drawer fronts that I knew I'd have to get off. First thing I did was I went in with some crud cutter and gave it a really good clean, and then I rinsed it with just some clean water to get any residue off. I went in with my goof off to get off those sticky stickers that were stuck there, and I used a scraper as well to help me get them off. I went in with some Elmer's wood glue because I had some drawers that needed to be fixed where the dovetail joins had come apart. So I made sure I went into each of those joins with the wood glue. And then I stuck them together and used the good old hand hammer to get them in place, and I clamped them down. On the front of the drawers, I put a little piece of scrap wood between the drawer front and the clamp, just to make sure I didn't get any marks on the drawer front. And then I went in and wiped away any excess wood glue that I had, and I let these dry for 24 hours. Now those drawer fronts that had some deep scratches, what I did is I mixed up some wood filler with some water to create a paste. And I basically went in and brushed that over all of the drawer fronts in order to fill those scratches. Once the wood filler was dry, I went in with 220 grit sandpaper and sand those drawer fronts down just to make sure there was no excess wood filler. I wanted to keep the top drawer natural wood. This is what it looked like after I'd sanded it down. And I went in with Minwax gel stain in walnut to give this a beautiful colour. Now first I put the gel stain onto the drawer with a lint-free cloth. Now I left the gel stain on for 3 minutes and then came back and wiped it off. When it was time to paint, I like to check my flow on a piece of cardboard first to make sure the paint is coming out in a nice amount. And I went in with my Wagner 3000 spray gun to spray the paint on. The paint I used had an inbuilt primer, so I didn't need to prime this piece first. Before I sprayed the edges, I put some painter's tape down on the drawer glides because if you get excess paint on the drawer glides, sometimes it can make it harder for the drawers to slide in and out. Unfortunately, after my first coat, I realised I hadn't done a good enough job filling in those scratches, so I had to fill them in again with wood filler, sand them down and repaint them. Once my paint and top coat was dry, I removed the paint tape that I had put on the drawer slides, and then it was time to put my handles on. This involved a lot of measuring. Okay, so the issue is because this has the hangover lip, I can't put it center because then this lip will hang down a little bit further. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So slightly above the center?
Yeah, so does that look okay or does it look too high?
No, that looks good.
Alright, so it's basically like a little bit more than a centimeter above where the center is.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay.
Glad to be of help.
Thanks, cutie.
Yeah.
And boy, did these handles give me a run for my money. They were a lot harder to put on than I thought they were going to be. Oh my goodness, it looks so crooked. How did that happen? Oh. Alright, we will come back to that one. I persevered and I eventually got all of the handles on. Part of the issue was I had to be millimeter perfect to do those drill holes, and if I was out by just a little bit, the screws wouldn't go into the handles, and it took me a long time to get this going. But eventually I got there and I got all of the handles in and straight. I cleaned up and then this piece was done. Just a reminder of what this piece looked like before I started. Had a bunch of scratches on the front, sticky stuff that needed to come out, and it was just in bad shape. And this is how it looked once I was finished with it. beautiful dresser I found at a Habitat for Humanity restore, which is basically an op shop or a thrift store, and it was $60. So I was super ecstatic about that because I loved the low boy style with the 9 drawers. It was in rough shape though. It had a lot of scratches, a lot of dents. There were pieces of veneer missing on the drawers. But I thought that I would be able to give it some love and give it a new lease of life. The shape that this was in, it was a little above my skill set to restore it. So what I decided to do was paint the base black and do my best to restore the drawers. So my first step was washing this piece because it was quite dirty. So the first thing I did, I put some Dawn dish soap in some warm water and I went over the whole piece, got it all nice and clean. And then I went back over with just warm water. And this is to wipe off any residue left behind by the Dawn dish soap. The Dawn dish soap is a degreaser, which helps get off any grime that's accumulated over the years. And then the plain hot water just helps us get a nice clean base for sanding, restaining the drawers and painting the base of the dresser. So after I'd finally got it clean, my next step was to fill in any scratches or dents within the dresser. Now on the base of the dresser, I just used normal wood filler. I think it was Alma's wood filler. And then on the drawers, I wanted to use a stainable wood filler because I knew I was going to restain the drawers. So I filled in all my holes, I let that dry. The one thing that was handy about the stainable wood filler was that it changed color as it dried, which is handy. So after my wood filler had dried, I sanded down the base of the dresser and I sanded down all the drawers as well. And with the drawers, I made sure I gave all of the drawer front a good sanding because I was going to use a gel stain on them. And on the base of the dresser, I just gave it a good scuff sand, which means I used quite a high grit sandpaper. I used 220 grit, I believe. Which means it's not that coarse, it's quite a fine sandpaper because all I'm doing is creating a little bit of roughness so that my paint will stick better to it. So after everything was sanded, I wiped them all down to get off any sanding dust. And then on the base of the dresser, I decided to paint it black and I used Melange's One paint in their black. And what I liked about this is that it had an inbuilt top coat in it, which was very nice. I did decide to prime the base of the dresser first. You don't have to, but just because I'd sanded through the finish in a lot of places, I didn't want any of the wood tannins popping through, and I wanted a smooth surface for my paint to go onto. So I primed this with a primer just to make it a little bit of a smoother surface. But for adhesion purposes, I could have just gone on with the Melange paint, but I wanted to make sure none of the wood tannins popped through where I'd sanded through the finish. And I sprayed on the Melange paint, so that worked really nicely. I use a Wagner 3000 spray gun, which I quite like. It gives me a nice smooth finish and is generally quicker than painting with a paintbrush or rolling with a roller. And I ended up doing 2 coats of the black paint. So once the paint had dried, I went in with Fusion's furniture wax, and I put on one coat of that with a brush I had that made it very easy to put on, and then I let that dry according to the instructions on the packet, and I came back in with a buffing pad and I just buffed the wax off after that. I didn't need to put the wax on because Melange's One Paint actually has a built-in top coat, which I love, but I did just want to give it just that little bit of extra protection. So I put the furniture wax on as well, and it just gave it a nice little sheen and luster as well, which I really liked. As to the drawers, after I had sanded them down, what I did was I put on Minwax's Gel Stain in Walnut, and I put a decently thick coat of that on, left it for the 3 minutes that it says to do so on the instructions, and then I wiped that off. It says to allow 24 hours for the gel stain to dry before you go in with your top coat, and I used Minwax's Polycrylic as my top coat in a satin finish, and I ended up doing 2 coats of the polycrylic to protect the drawers. And I just like to use, it's actually a brush I get from our dollar store, and I just find it works really well. I don't get brush marks, and it puts the polycrylic on really well. So after I had put on our top coat with the polycrylic and it had dried beautifully on the drawers, what I did is I went in with Howard's Bead and Wax, which is, it's like beeswax and orange oil, and I went through the inside of the drawers with that, and that just rejuvenates the wood, especially because the inside of these drawers had a lot of scratches and marks on them. And so what I had done is I had sanded down the inside of these drawers to refresh them. And so the Howard's Feed and Wax just helped seal it again, but also bring out the beautiful color of the wood within the drawers. I'll give you a reminder of what this dresser looked like when I first picked it up. It was beautiful and I loved the shape of it. It was just in a little bit of rough condition with some scratches and dinks, but here is what it looks like afterwards. Today we've got this mid-century modern dresser that I picked up from a thrift store for $28.50. I'm going to show you how I transform it to sell it for a whole lot more on Facebook Marketplace.
My first job was to clean this sucker up because it was dirty. First I went in with some Dawn dish soap to scrub away any grease stains or muck that had built up over the years, and then I went back in with just some clean hot water to get any soapy residue off. You never know what you're going to find in your drawers. So once I finished my treasure hunting, I took out the liners and I took off all the hardware and kept it in a bucket with the screws in one place. I like to mark all my drawers so I know exactly where they go back. TL stands for top left, if you're wondering. Once the drawers were out, I gave it a good old vacuum. I used Minwax stainable wood filler to fill any scratches on the drawers. I sanded the base down to bare wood with my Surf Prep sander. The hardware appeared to be solid brass, but it needed a good clean. So I used some Clorox scrub singles and some Barkeeper's Friend to polish those up and make them look beautiful again. Here's how the handles were looking once they were cleaned up. Here's a bit of a side-by-side comparison. Here the top half has been cleaned and the bottom half I've yet to clean. I used Minwax gel stain in walnut on the drawers, and basically you put it on, leave it on for 3 minutes, and then you wipe it back off. I also went over these in a top coat of Minwax's polyacrylic in the satin finish. There were a lot of scratches on the top of this dresser, so I filled them all in with wood filler, and then it was time to go in and sand them down. I also gave the rest of the body of the dresser a scuff sand, which is just a really light sand with fine grit sandpaper to give the paint something to adhere to. Once I'd sanded everything down, I gave it a wipe down with a clean microfiber cloth just to get any of those dust particles off the dresser to make it ready for painting. Taped off the base of the dresser just to make sure it didn't get any paint on it. I always like to check the flow of the paint coming out of my spray gun on a piece of cardboard first, just to make sure the right amount is coming out, not too much and not too little. I ended up doing a total of 2 coats of paint all over the dresser. I had a bit of a problem on the top of the dresser in that the paint was looking different where it was on top of the wood filler and whereas it was on the normal part of the dresser. And sometimes this happens, and if I had have used a primer before I painted, it would have basically blocked this effect. I didn't use a primer because my paint had one built in, but it was more for adhesion purposes as opposed to stain blocking purposes. So after I'd done my 2 coats of paint, I realized that I needed to fix this. So I put a coat of Zins's Bullseye shellac on top of the dresser, and basically what this did, it sealed it and gave it a uniform surface for the paint to go on top of. So I did 1 more coat of paint over the top of the shellac on the top of the dresser, and this fixed the problem. After I'd peeled off the tape protecting the base, I did put a piece of tape to protect the painted part of the dresser from getting any stain on it, and I chose to stain the base in Minwax's gel stain in walnut. I did 1 coat of this and left it to dry for 24 hours, And when I came back, I felt like the stain hadn't taken that well and needed to be a little bit darker and richer. So I actually went over it again with Minwax's gel stain in mahogany, just to hopefully give it a little bit more richness and a little bit more of a red tone to match the drawers. And it worked better this way. Still wasn't perfect, but it did look much better. Once the top coat on the drawers was dry, it was time to put the hardware back on. The wood inside the drawers was a little bit dry, so I went in with Dixie Belle's Big Mama's Butter in the flannel scent. And what this does is rehydrates the wood and gives it a beautiful smell. And here's a reminder of what the dresser looked like before. And this is what it looked like after. Thanks again for watching these 5 MCM furniture makeovers, and if you've enjoyed them, hit that subscribe button down below and I'll see you in the next video.